Hello, how are you, Charlene? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the intro, Hunter.
Oh, yeah, of course. Happy to do it. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Denver, Colorado, actually.
Denver, Colorado. How is it? Is it cold? Is it warm yet? Is it spring?
I would say it's in between, super typical of Denver. It was
Yeah.
just freezing. Now it's sunny but cold, so I'll take it.
Yeah, kind of the same here in New York. It's swinter.
Exactly, exactly.
So I gave a little bit of an intro about you here. For folks that are maybe this is the first time meeting you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and how you ended up where you are now?
Yeah, of course. Well, working within was born out of a deep desire to, right some wrongs that I had seen early in my career. What drove me to start the company was actually a result of my early career. I was working with international foundations and large banks, and I was seeing these transactions of hundreds of millions of dollars getting passed through to these businesses and these large organizations. And I was not seeing that same like allocation and loose allocation of funds happening for grassroots leaders who effectively are getting calls in the middle of the night, who are the people that, people in the community are leaning on. And so I saw that a lot of like the caretaking burden of community
Mm,
leaders fell on a lot of Black community nonprofit leaders themselves, and still had to deal with like funding scarcity.
yeah.
And so that's why we have working with them. That's why we provide those services.
Wow. Awesome. So that is, I mean, I'm be really curious to hear about some of those wrongs, maybe specifically that you witnessed, because I'm imagining they're innumerable.
Yeah.
Are there a
Yeah.
couple of stories that really, or rather experiences that have stuck with you that you're like, when you wake up, you're like, this is why I keep doing this today?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. Innumerable is a great word for it. I've experienced many instances, but one in particular, which led me to kind of leave that position and move on. I was
Mm,
working with a national foundation, and they were looking to allocate $300 million in their
a lot of money.
that's what I'm saying. Like really, that's what they were looking to do, is allocate that much in funding. And
Wow.
I was super optimistic about the project, of course,
Yeah.
except this funder would always talk about Black and Brown students and how Black and Brown student outcomes were needed. There were no Black and Brown leaders deciding these funding allocations. I was the first Black consultant that was hired on my team, serving this different team. And anyway, the process to allocate these funds I found to be just going back to friends of friends and just re-giving funds there. The process was kind of like, for lack of a better word, just illogical. There wasn't like true merit I was seeing throughout the process. And I was ultimately disappointed because this is $300 million of capital and there's more, right? This is just one tiny sliver of the portfolio. And man, it's going to people, and grassroots nonprofit leaders have no idea that that's even happening. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So can you just set the level set for for us a little bit here? What is a social entrepreneur?
yeah. So, it can get really broad. So, I guess it would be helpful for me to clarify. The social entrepreneur is someone who like uses their own means to create a business, organization, nonprofit that's ultimate goal is some social outcome. So it could be health focused, education focused, income or job focused. I mean, there's a plethora, of course, of social causes, but to me, that's a social entrepreneur. So it's not decided by tax status or entity status.
Okay, great. So for social entrepreneurs, I imagine they might feel overwhelmed or intimidated by fundraising. So what are some common misconceptions about accessing capital and how can leaders shift their mindsets around this?
Yeah. I would say the first misconception is what I've already touched on. is that raising fundraising is a purely meritorious process. That
Mm.
is what struck me from the beginning, a bit naively, but it was my first understanding of the world. And nothing can be like purely meritorious, right? We all have biases. We all know that. And so the way to mitigate that misconception is to focus on one, having a viable organization, but also making sure to nurture like key relationships, get the dinner, grab the coffee, get in front of a funder's face. Those methods are a lot more important than having the perfect pitch deck.
Yep.
I also say that for social entrepreneurs who maybe don't have a nonprofit status, the misconception can be that you have to raise from like a venture capital establishment and avoid debt. And avoiding debt, that can be true for nonprofit leaders as well. And I would just mention that, debt is one of the cheapest and also doesn't require you to give up ownership of anything. And it can be used really effectively. So can raising from alternative sources that are not maybe as sexy as venture capital, but things like community development financial institutions, things like crowdfunding or revenue-based financing too.
Talk to me about debt a little bit more because I feel like that is a very loaded word. And like even me, like I was just like, oh, like I felt it in my body. It was like, oh, it took me so long to get out of debt, like
Yeah.
this emotional experience. But when it's about a business, it's a different entity, literally. So talk to me about the difference between like maybe a misconception that people may have, I may have about personal debt versus like a business debt.
Yeah. And I mean, I empathize with that. Let me tell you, debt is super emotional. That's why I like to speak on it. But for debt, I think it's important to understand that when we're thinking about people who have access to capital, and for instance, in my background, when I was on the banking side, all I saw actually, and I was in corporate banking really early in my career at a big bank,
Mm,
we all know. And all of the corporations we shop from are heavily leveraged, or AKA managing their risk by having hundreds, tens of millions of dollars of debt sitting on their balance sheet. This is something that all of them do. There is not a big company like that without debt on their balance sheet. And
mm,
so, luckily, I was able to have that insight, not necessarily the mindset shift, but the insight to
mm.
understand that for those folks who have capital access that my leaders desire, they are using debt. And so take that and transfer that same principle to smaller businesses, earlier businesses who maybe have less cash, less assets in those bigger entities. Um, the purpose behind debt is to grow. And so in a business setting, um, it's not to like offset your working capital costs or your day-to-day costs. We want to use debt and other funding resources to grow our revenue so that we don't have to rely on debt. We don't have to rely on funders. We don't have to rely on donors. That's the ultimate goal. And so if you approach debt with a growth capital perspective in mind rather than a working capital, then you can actually see exactly how you would use that debt to generate more revenue, which would make you more confident that you'll be able to pay it off and keep going about your business.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you say is a high level differentiator between debt and taking money from like a VC, let's say?
I would say the big difference is debt is a lot cheaper and you give
Yeah,
up
you got to
owner.
give like, yeah, capital and equity and all that stuff to VC. Yeah.
And usually with VC, you have to keep raising it, which means you keep having to dilute your ownership. You might need more debt too, but you don't have to dilute your ownership and then end up with this tiny sliver of something that you created and wanted to own.
Yeah, and when you take on debt, you probably don't have to like answer to other people's wishes about your company as opposed to a VC that's like,
They're on
where's
your
my
board
next?
usually. Yeah.
What was that? You said, I'm sorry, I talked at the same time as you.
Oh, you're okay. I was saying they're on your board usually. They can fire you if things escalate. I mean, yeah.
Yes, we have seen some rather dramatic firings in the media over the past year, haven't we?
Yes. Like
And rehirings, interestingly.
it happens over and over. Uber, all yeah.
Yeah, yeah. OpenAI, obviously, is like there's just huge companies that go through these things that I don't know. It's maybe back to the mindset shift where these giant entities and corporations and people and with money and boards and bankruptcies and all this stuff where it's like, again, if it's like a personal experience like that, that feels like I lost, I messed up, I failed. Whereas like debt is a normal part of the balance sheet. Filing for bankruptcy happens in companies all the time. It's how they survive. And what do you work, how do you help people shift their mindset to be in that business orientation and out of the emotional orientation?
Yeah, it was definitely a big part of what I have to do, especially working with social entrepreneurs, because usually the like genesis of the whole organization is through kind of an emotional connection, which is still super valid, of course. And so
Yeah.
I would say it's a long-term project, of course, because ultimately, when we're working like on fundraising strategy, for example, we're talking about creating value to a set of customers when we're fundraising. It might be the funder, it might be a corporate sponsor, it might be an individual donor, might be a major gifts type of donor. Um,
Mm,
or it may be someone who's willing to pay for your services who is not your typical beneficiary. And so that is in our mind kind of bringing the business social impact, bringing the business side. And we do face resistance, trying to communicate about how you want to make sure you're providing value to receive the value or to receive the money. And when we're looking to grow revenue for social entrepreneurs, that's often where that kind of rub comes in. You're looking to access more capital, but if you want to access more capital, you've got to compete, for lack of a better word, a bit more, and therefore be able to justify why this money is going to you. And so we ultimately like to focus on the same goal that we have, which is getting more money in the bank of these social leaders. And
mm.
so ultimately, if we're looking to raise the dollar amount we want to raise, then those conversations have to be had and we have to agree on a path forward. And so it's almost like a transformation that we work through with our clients to ensure that they're going to be successful in raising that amount of funds.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear about maybe some favorite strategies or success stories from your clients that you're speaking about, especially around diversifying revenue streams, because that's a big focus that y'all have for nonprofits and social ventures, right?
Mhm. Yep,
Yeah.
definitely. I would say there's often, well, one, a big constraint that's usually just kind of under all of this is capacity and time, of course. And so often we find that there are low hanging fruit that we can like pull on for to increase the fundraising potential of the people we get to work with. And
Yeah.
so um,
I love that you're one of the few people that like saw that old metaphor through. Like,
and I doubted it. You saw that, right?
no, I saw it and I was like, no, go for it. No one, I've never seen anyone see it through to the end. Great.
Pulling the fruit now. Yeah. And yeah, so the low hanging fruit outside of like grants, which is of course a big focus still for a lot of the folks we work with. There are fundraising events. We've helped organizations for the first time implement a fundraising event and raise 30 grand just in a day. We've seen people implement donor campaigns when previously just wasn't able to organize and centralize forces that can raise 25 grand quick. And so these are quick unrestricted funds that can be raised outside of typical
Mm,
application cycles. It's also things like impact investments. There are all types of options, but ultimately, like our first fundraising option, like we mentioned, is being able to sell your service to someone who can afford it. And so that, on top of all those others, can help to mitigate how much leaders are having to rely on grant funding and all those things, which can be pulled out from under them.
I love that. Sell your services to someone who can afford it. That's really smart because that can mean shooting up, not shooting down, right? That's another like mindset shift. Be like, oh, we gotta go this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you help people find their value in that way with their with what they're selling?
Yeah. Because a lot of our leaders are just super passionate and know from their own experience the problems in their community, for example, they do so much work because they care. Like our leaders care so much about people and helping. And a big part of what we can help them do when they're kind of in that state and just really care about the work, they don't want to do paperwork, they don't want to do strategy and all these things. We can come in and help them kind of streamline and tell the
Mm.
story of what they're doing through a theory of change. You got the problem you're solving, the activities you have to solve that problem, the outputs of those activities, and the long-term outcomes you're affecting. That is definitely a way that we're able to help them kind of see their value because often it can just be a little bit reactive because they care so much. And so by being able to tell that story, it's real clear what your long-term outcomes and immediate outcomes are for anyone who's looking to invest, no matter what category they're in. And then outside of that, we like to make sure and we do like look at competition because even social entrepreneurs and enterprises are competing in a market. Their market might be different, right? It's more government, it's more philanthropy, but it's still a market. And so we make sure to analyze their competition and also look at what makes them competitive, what makes them stand out amongst that competition. So that is front and center in any fundraising communications they're doing as well.
Yeah, that's so important to analyze the competition. I started a new business this past year and recently, and I knew this moment was going to happen where I was going to see a lot of other people doing a similar thing with like a similar process, right? But no one's hiring me for my tech stack.
Yeah.
Like no one cares. They
Yeah.
just were like, how do I show up and how I do it? And when I was a little low about it, I was like, oh, what's the point? And all this like negative stuff. Then I was like, wait, what's the point of doing something someone else has already done? That would be literally everything and anything because everyone has already done something similar. So it's like
Exactly.
how we show up to we're doing it, right?
Exactly. It's extremely important. And there's nothing new under the sun. You're exactly right. It's not like everyone is coming up with completely new ways of doing things, but you have to really, like, really vocalize and put up front what makes you different because a funder or is looking through a million applications for this grant cycle. A donor is getting asked to give money all the time, right? So these things are important.
Yeah. And I love the storytelling aspect that you were speaking to because when we're in it, it's hard to see our own story. But like when you come in with a fresh set of eyes, you're like, oh, this is the story that I'm seeing. Here's the parts of the story that I'm missing. Because you know this because you made it, but I didn't know that until I talked to you.
That has literally happened. That just happened a couple weeks ago. We were at a client site and we were hearing all these things, and I was like, "You, this isn't even on your website, but I'm hearing this, and this is a huge opportunity for you to launch into a different category of funders, and it's just part of the way you run things." But as an outsider, just being able to help them see their own specialness too, because we all get bogged down. Work can still feel like work, even if it's your purpose. We all
Mhm.
get bogged down, and so just helping them see the light that they bring is honestly really cool in that way. It's a fun part of it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs looking to identify and build relationships with the right funding partners?
Mm, yeah. So, hmm, I think that yeah. So
Got those wheels turning in you. I like that.
I tell people to if you're gonna fundraise, you gotta be a people person. And you can fake it, right? Like if you're introverted, you can, segment in a way that just doesn't drain your energy completely. But
Yeah.
fundraising is all about connecting to people, getting them to believe in you and your story. And so, with that in mind, I always let people know um, cast a wide net. But because we want to make sure that you're recruiting people that are in alignment with you, it's always good to, of course, have like a set of values that you stand by and know that you want your funders to also kind of have. And this is relevant even for me as an entrepreneur, not even for our clients too, right? When I seek funding, I want to, have access capital from someone who I know is not going to beat my door down, something for example. And so being able to establish those values and see it embodied by an organization, donor, entity, investor is always a great way to go. You don't want to get distracted by maybe prestige. in sacrifice of anything that's really important to you from a value side. Um, and ultimately, I also tell people kind of related to the storytelling is be clear on what you do first, because even with the values, if you're not clear on what you do first, then it's really easy to attract the wrong type of partner funder.
Mhm.
It's too easy. I have done wrong team members. I've done it a million times, and so you want to be sure that your impact, your outcomes you want are clear and your values are clear. And then you tell people that, and they either opt in or out, and it makes it easy for you. Of course, this becomes harder when money is involved. And so it may be more slow going process, but it's still worth it in the end, because what can really harm an organization is having an idiosyncrasy, especially when it comes to the funding.
Yeah, because there's the money now, money later, right?
Exactly.
Taking money now and you're like, they don't really pass the vibe check or something feels weird, but we're strapped for cash, and then you do it, and then it's that the gut knows, like
Yes.
we know, but then our logic is like, but we need money. Yeah. And hanging in there. How do you help people hang in there when you're like, I wouldn't go with that one yet. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you know what? You've got to have a faith source if you're going to be an entrepreneur, period. So that is number one, because it can feel a little crazy making. Absolutely. For me, it's God. There are so many like ways you can explore your faith or your spirituality in this day and age. And so just being able to call on something outside of yourself basically is number one. And that also looks like self-care, alone time, all those different ways to kind of get out of your body, I would say, and out of your mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely is a big part of it. I know that's the less like book list, to-do list version of that answer, but it's true. And it's, man, entrepreneurship. Anyway, and so,
No, I'm with you. I'm with you there. Power greater than myself did shift my relationship to my work, to myself, and whether it's, for some folks, it's a specific God, God could be the great outdoors, like you said, like that could be your sense of a power. I go to the Grand Canyon, I go to the woods, like, I don't know how any of this works. Like, how did this happen, right? There's something outside of me that then I can come back to and just be like, tell me what to do. Show me where to go. Let me get out of the way.
please, literally, yes. So
Yeah,
that is
for
one of
real.
that's one of the key ways. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then finding those little ways, if it's putting down the phone and spending time with a loved one or your dog or whatever, just so that we can zone in and be like, if my power is like tied to my values, which
Mm,
is supporting my family and my loved ones or my community, whatever that is, like then we're cooking with gas, right? Because then it's not about I need money. It's well, money is a tool.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And of course, the more, to give the logical folks the logical argument as well, though that is logical too. It's also like, how do I prevent the need to have this money in the short term all the time as well? How do I
Mm.
make sure I'm accessing funding that is sustainable rather than funding that it makes me feel unsustainable too? How do I structure my organization to become more sustainably funded? But again, that's a long-term goal, but ultimately, right, can be an effective change.
100%. So for leaders that are just starting their fundraising journeys right now, what actionable steps can they take today to make those ventures more financially sustainable, to have that long-term plan? What are the small building blocks to get to that long-term plan?
Yeah. The first step, and even something I've recently been improving myself for my own business, is just really looking at every dollar you're spending and checking for the ROI.
Mm,
Especially when growing, if you're a social entrepreneur, you want to establish something that's awesome. Of course, we all do. And, you want it to seem credible and valid. What can easily happen is we kind of burn expenses on things we don't need yet or that aren't mission critical. This can also happen with nonprofit leaders because mission creep or just the growth of programming and services can happen, and that costs more money. And so they start just burning money on things that might not be critical to the essence of your mission at this point, true for business and nonprofits. And so just ensuring that every dollar spent is actually needed to be spent, that can reduce costs, right? And make sure there's more reserves left over at the end of the year, for example. And then beyond kind of just that extreme cost management, which is what I'm calling it, because it's hard to really like look at the number and be like, can this be lower? And like it probably can.
Mhm.
And then the second part of that for me, if you're looking to level up your fundraising journey, is outside of just widening your net of connections and being a people person, is talking to your customer and getting a deeper look at the problem your customer is solving so you can
Mm,
have an even better solution. Because if you can become a better solution, you can become cheaper or you can become more accessible to more people. Those types of things are what grow you sustainably because someone is coming in paying you for the service, and or more people are coming in and paying you for the service, or the person you're already serving is paying you more for the service. So there's just a lot of ways that can go. And so if you can become an expert at solving the problem that your customer needs, that is how you create value in the market. And so whether your customer is a beneficiary or the customer is a school or the customer is a district, that strategy can help you make sure that you're earning money more often, more consistently.
oh, I love that. So I'm picking up some of what it might be like to work with you. I'm curious if one of your clients were to describe your style in 5 or 6 words, what do you think that would be?
Oh, hmm. Uh, my style, I would say personable, um, rigorous,
Mm,
um, purposeful,
mhm,
bold, and innovative.
mm. Yes, yes, yes. I'm getting all of that too. Isn't it nice to be self-aware?
You know what? Yes, I'll take that. Yes, Hunter.
How did
Thank
you get there? That's not easy to do. What do you work on? What's your practice to be able to have that sort of insight for yourself?
I'm a personality test person. I've done them all. Enneagram, Myers.
Enneagram? What number are you?
I'm a four, I think. So like fours are obsessed with themselves. So they're like, I
I
have
feel
to be
seen and
different.
attacked.
They have to feel different. So I admit that. um,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
hilarious.
yeah. Um, yeah. But actually psychology, like and people are actually interesting to me. So of course I've like used myself as a test case. You know what I mean?
One
Like,
we are our best use case and test case, right? Because it's like, well, if I'm feeling these things or I'm going through this, I don't live in a vacuum. Like
yeah,
we are the human race. Like we are one creature. So other people are going to be feeling these things too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could, we just have a couple minutes left. If you could just wave your magic wand and fix one major challenge in the world of nonprofit fundraising, what would it be and why?
I would want private philanthropy because they have the most freedom in terms of who they're able to give to at any point in history, literally, because their money is private. Um,
Hmm.
I would want them to be more willing to deploy capital in forms that are not grants, and for the donors of philanthropy to be more willing to do that. Things like program related investments that or asset transfers, um,
Hmm.
other methods of moving capital that are not just grants that can really help accelerate because philanthropies don't even give out all their money every year, and most of the time they don't. So there's just a lot sitting there. I wish they'd be more free.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that we touch on before we wrap up?
I just want to encourage everyone go for it. Fundraising is a game of no's a lot of the time. That doesn't mean, you won't get a yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the best way to stay connected with you? We already linked up on LinkedIn, so I know you're active there.
Yes, I am. I'm the people person. I'm definitely active on LinkedIn. I respond on LinkedIn, or email Charlene at workingwithin.net. You can reach me there.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Charlene, this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much. And I look forward to keeping the conversation going with you on LinkedIn. I'm so happy and grateful to meet you. And I can't wait to just follow along, see what you're up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. I appreciate it.
All right. See you later. Have a good day.
You too.